I had Dr. Sauce on the other night, an American doctor who startled some people by saying that a patient who wants to commit suicide, we're talking about mental illness, should be allowed to, in a sense, that there is no, you have no right to intrude on people and commit them involuntarily. We were discussing involuntary psychiatric treatment. And I said, if there is someone who wants to commit suicide and they're a danger to themselves, shouldn't you stop them? And should you just let them do it? And he said, certainly. And we didn't get to explore that as much as I would like to, and he's coming back on the show. But do you believe in a patient's right to not continue his life or to commit suicide?
No, I don't believe in that, because a patient that has the tendency to commit suicide is mentally ill, and it's the duty of the doctor to treat that illness. Whether it's a physical illness or a mental illness, the doctor must treat this. So I think I wouldn't agree with it that a patient who has the feeling to commit suicide, that he should just be left alone to commit suicide. I think that this mental illness should be treated.
Well, here's a question I was thinking of getting at. Suppose someone came to you and said, I have a brother with a bad heart, and he's a genius, and I'm not a genius, and I want to donate my heart to him so he can live. Would you take it?
No, not at all.
You didn't have to think very long on that.
No, we as doctors do not have the right to take a life. It's our duty to continue treatment of the patient until we feel we've reached a situation where it's hopeless. But we have no right to take a life, and therefore it will be impossible. I've had this situation.
Have you?
Oh yes, I have had people offer their hearts for transplantation, but it's out of the question that we can do that.
I see. Your first operation was not announced beforehand, was it? I mean, did anyone know that you were going to do an operation? It wasn't in the sense of a space shot where we all stood and held our fingers and all. If it hadn't succeeded, would you have tried to have it not publicized?
I don't think it would have been possible to prevent the news from getting out.
In other words, you would have preferred it not to get out?
Well, I think one always prefers to keep your failure from being headlines, but I think it would have been impossible for us to have prevented the news leaking out. The thing that's interesting is we certainly didn't realize that the heart transplant would make such tremendous headlines and such tremendous news. It's only afterwards that we realized that it was such an important event. I think we would have been, everybody in the team would have been much more nervous if we realized that this would have happened after the transplant.
You really didn't expect that much publicity? I mean, it's such an incredible thing.
No, because I think that the lay people have the wrong idea. Heart transplant wasn't from nothing to a transplant. We had for many years gradually worked up first with very straightforward heart operations to more complicated heart operations to eventually to the transplant. This was a natural evolution of heart surgery, and it wasn't just from nothing to a transplant. So we didn't think that the operation, certainly it wasn't a tremendous medical breakthrough, as you probably understand, and therefore we didn't think it would make such tremendous news. The reason why it made such news is because it was the heart that we transplanted. The liver is a much more difficult organ to transplant than the heart, but the liver transplant, which was done before heart transplantation, didn't make the news because the liver is not such an important organ as the heart. I looked this up, and there's some very interesting facts. If you take my Bible, I don't know what religion you belong to, but the Old and the New Testament in the Bible that I read, the heart is mentioned 826 times. If you take an organ like the stomach, it's only mentioned once. And the lungs are not even mentioned in the Bible.
The appendix gets very little play.
Not at all. So it shows you that what an important role the heart as an organ played in the time of the Bible.
Then someone, I think it was either Sigmund Freud or one of his colleagues, once said, if you go to heaven and you meet the Almighty, what will you say to him? And either Freud or his friend said, I will hold up a cancerous bone to him and say, how do you excuse this? Do you know that story?
No, I don't.
Well, that gets me. What would you say? Or another way of putting it, in fact, a doctor friend of yours asked this question, Dr. Lillehei, whom you're acquainted with. If the good Lord started all over again to design the human body, he said, what change would you ask him to make? What one change?
One single change. I think that probably, as being selfish and being involved in heart surgery, I would ask him to put the heart in a more accessible place, that I don't have to cut through so many bones to get to the
Not on the outside, I hope.
Well, somewhere where I can just open the zip and get to it.
I see. Well, I hope I hope you get a chance to ask it. There was we called some other doctors and to see what they would like to ask you. And there was this article in Life magazine recently about the feud between Dr. DeBakey and Dr. Cooley. A lot of people in this country read about the two famous heart surgeons, and they're not speaking anymore, and they were once colleagues. Dr. Cooley...
They're still speaking, but not to each other.
Oh, they speak, yes. They haven't lost the power to speak. But we must be medically accurate here. But Dr. Cooley wanted to ask you if there shouldn't be much more caution used now, that they feel there's no reason to abandon transplants, but maybe a lot more caution should be used now. And you haven't operated in a year, I believe.
No, we've always exercised great caution in the selection of patients for transplantation. This is something that I've mentioned often, that we have all these laws to protect the donor. I think we should have some laws to protect the patients too, so that they don't have unnecessary transplants. And in our institution, certainly we've been very selective in the type of patient that we would select for transplantation. And that is why, although we started this operation, we have only done 5 transplants, because we would not dream of doing a heart transplant on a patient that we can still help and benefit with some more conventional form of treatment. And I agree completely with Dr. Cooley that great caution should be exercised, but I'd like to tell him we've done it all along.
I feel I got away from Sigmund Freud's question a bit, and it's interesting, you're being religious, because he was not. Does the existence of cancer disturb you? Of course it does, but I mean by this, why is it there? Why are there these horrible things if there is a benevolent God? This is a question you get in freshman's philosophy, I know, but do you think about that?
That's a very interesting question. I once worked with a doctor in Richmond, Mel Williams, and although he was a doctor, he was very interested in religion, and he did some pre-medical degree in which he wrote a thesis on prayer.
Prayer?
On prayer. And he sometimes also preached in his church. And he told me about the subject that he took once for his sermon. And it was very interesting. He said that he chose the following words for his sermon. If God is good, then there is no God. And if God is bad, then he's not God. Now, what he tried to say was, if God's good, why do we have things like cancer and the suffering of children and wars and all these terrible suffering that you see today with drug addiction? So if God is good, then why should these things happen? And of course, if he's bad, then he's not God. To answer your question, I don't have an explanation to it, why we have things like cancer and all these horrible diseases. I don't know why God allows these things to happen. I think that the human brain is not competent to judge this. It's like asking the human brain to get a concept of infinity.